Sampradaya, they say that the jivas are of three types: sattvikas, rajasikas, and tamasikas, and that only the jivas of the sattvic type can attain liberation from the material world. My question is, what kind of arguments do they have for reaching this conclusion? Since, Sampradaya, since if that were the case, Krishna would be a partial God by creating jivas with full capacity to reach their maximum potential and others with a kind of predefined limitation. And the Vedic scriptures do not support the idea of a partial God. Was the conclusion of these two sampradayas somehow influenced by the caste system, suggesting that only brahmins could reach the ultimate goal? And another question that arose by extension of this one is, what does it mean to say that we are members of the Brahma-Madhva-Gaudiya Sampradaya, since we have such different philosophical conclusions?
Well,
oh, sorry, Guru Maharaj, before you start, I would like to remind you about going slower again because of the interpretation.
I might have to remind me about points raised in the question because it was rather long. I would say, first of all, that what was the last part he asked? Oh yeah, got the last part. I may have missed the one in between, but to begin, they're a little different, the Madhva Sampradaya and the Vallabha Sampradaya in their classification of jivas, but there is a similarity in them that we don't entirely share, which is a gradation of jivas that includes certain jivas that are not eligible for liberation. By contrast, it appears that in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, all jivas have the potential to be liberated, but it would be inaccurate at the same time to say that there is not a gradation of jivas within Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Indeed, in the very basic sense, there is a gradation in that there are some jivas who are eternally liberated and some that are not. So that's a gradation. And there's also a gradation of jivas by looking at it from the perspective of karma. Some have worse karma, some have better karma, and karma has no beginning, it's anadi. So, and while the karmic differences or the gradation is external, right? Because karma is external, it is nonetheless a result of some internal volition on the part of the jiva. So you could make a case superficially, I think, that, well, Gaudiya Vaishnava says all jivas are equal, and there's some truth to that, but we look more closely, it's not as black and white as it might seem. And with regard to the spiritual world, if there are differences by karma, which are external, but nonetheless are a result of internal, as I say, volition, there's no meaning to karma if there's no choice on the part of the jiva. Sometimes people say, well, there's no free will because you're just under the influence of karma. But the whole idea of karma is that the jivas are making choices and therefore they're getting reactions, right? Now their reactions may tend, their choices may tend to be or informed by the samskaras that they have developed, and so they keep making the same sort of choices or similar choices. That's true. So that therefore, if we look at it like that, which we should, the more conditioned, if you will, a jiva is, the less its will is operative and functioning. So, for example, we say that in human life, the jiva's position is distinguished from the less complex forms of life, latter being largely a result of the abuse of the human form of life and the will that has greater capacity to be operative and manifest, and given the human vehicle, if you will. But the choice is there. It's internal, and it speaks to the idea further that, well, each jiva is an individual. They're all the same. They're all equal. But I think that the way in which that statement in Gaudiya Vaishnavism is to be taken is that they're all equal, like all snowflakes are equal. They're all wet, they're all cold, they all dissolve in heat, they all have fascinating patterns, and so on and so forth, but no two snowflakes are the same. And if they were the same or equal in all respects, then there wouldn't be two. No two things can be entirely the same and still be different. They would be one thing if they were entirely the same. So we have to look at these distinction, first of all, that's often made in this regard between the Gaudiya position on the jiva and that of Madhva and Vallabha, for example, with regard to different gradations of jivas, different types of jivas, and the Gaudiya parent, with a broad brush perspective, they're all the same, they're all equal. Actually, all individual, in that sense, they're all different, right? And therefore, they make different choices. Well, if they were equally all the same, they'd all make the same choices. This is a strong argument from Madhva's line. If the jivas were all the same, they'd all make the same choices. So they must be different. He wants to take it a step further. Now he gives his support from that for Swarupa Ved, difference in nature between jivas. But I'm not a student of Madhva's doctrine in any comprehensive sense, so I've never bothered to look up what scripture he gives to support his position. But one of the strong things in Madhva's line in this regard is the application of logic with regard to scriptural statements. So however much it may not be blatantly mentioned somewhere that there are different types of jivas and some are capable for suitable or qualified for attaining liberation, some are not. There is a strong logic to it. And part of that is, well, you can, your own experience of meeting everybody has experience either directly or hearing about it, real people in the world in human dress that are quite demonic. So it's not a question that God created some are demonic and some are not. God didn't create anything in one sense. The jivas are all eternal. It's complicated. At the same time, well, they are the will of Bhagavan. His will is variegated. And so Madhva would say, and Vallabha would say, the jiva's position is all the will of Bhagavan. There's no fault on his part. He exists. He does what he does. And he's in control of everything. Who can argue with that? Ishvar Paramakrishna Sarva Karna Karna. Not a blade of grass moves without the will of God. So God's in control of everything. What's the problem? And it's all God. So our vantage point of looking at it only allows us to feel it's not just or it's not proper or something like that. They would argue along those lines and say, we have experience that there are people like this. And then I believe, for example, Madhva might cite the Bhagavad-Gita. In the Bhagavad-Gita, there's a chapter, what is it, 17th chapter maybe, the divine and demonic, or is it 16th chapter, one of the later chapters, divine and the demonic. And there, one of the verses, he says, Krishna says that he places those demonic souls in wombs, life after life. So there could be, that could be seen as a reference, could be interpreted that way. But Krishna is saying he puts jivas in demonic bodies life after life. We'd say until they get so bad that they appear in the Prakat Lila like a Kamsa, and then he liberates them. You know, that's kind of way we might think about it. But that's a you know, interpretation, right, on our part, if you will. So there is a verse in the Bhagavad-Gita, life after life, I put them in demonic wounds. So he's got support, right? There are samsaran jivas. They're here for the samsara. The broader picture is that the material existence is also a lila. It's the Shrishti lila, the lila of creation, if you will. Even though nothing's created, it's just like manifest and unmanifest with no beginning. So in order for it to go on, well, part of it, some jivas are there to be liberated and some are there to carry it on, you know, so to speak. So again, I don't know all the references from Madhva or the Vallabha Sampradaya to support their position, but I'll say this as well. Both of these Sampradayas, Madhva Sampradaya and the Vallabha Sampradaya, which is really an extension of the Vishnu Swami Sampradaya and the Shuddha-Dvaita doctrine. It's a pure Vaishnava school, but Vallabha was prominent during the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So some people refer to it as the Vallabha Sampradaya, not without acknowledging its earlier origin. From that Sampradaya, the famous commentator on the Bhagavatam, Sridhar Swami, comes, whom Mahaprabhu so much appreciated. And the Goswamis, Rup, Sanatan, well, not Rupa, but he didn't write a commentary on Bhagavatam, but Jiva Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, they repeatedly will cite, and the commentator said, you know, Sridhar Swami said this, and Sridhar Swami said that, and then they go on and give their own commentaries, add on something, nuance, but they defer to him because Mahaprabhu deferred to him. Now, he was previously a member of the Advaita Sampradaya and even a founding, or the leading monk in the Govardhan Math at Jagannath Puri, which is one of Shankaracharya's 4 mosques or monasteries. It would seem that later that school is the one school of the Shankar Sampradaya of the 4 maths that has a heavy influence of bhakti in their school, bhakti as a means to merging into Brahman. So there's a number of persons who came out of that school who eventually embraced bhakti schools entirely, or sampradayas like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sampradaya. Sridhar Swami would look at it as one of them. He was a devotee of Narasimhadev. So we take it from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Jiva Goswami, who draws upon him, as well as Madhva and Ramanuja in his Sandarbhas. But about Sridhar Swami, he said, oh, he had a bait. He gave a bait to the Shankar Sampradaya, something like that. He would say some things to bring them in, and then inside of his commentary, there would be these bhakti ideas. So kind of like you talk to them a certain way to tell them something different, to convert them, something like that. Forget the analogy, something like, like tricking them, to come in. So anyway, so the Vallabha Sampradaya was very close with the Gaudiya Sampradaya. Vallabha personally was a contemporary of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. It's said in Bhakti Ratnakar, I believe, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu blessed him to have his own school separate from his. And there is eventually, the Vallabha Sampradaya took over the worship of Madhavendra Puri's deity, the Gopal deity, who's called, what's he called? Nathji, from the Bengalis who were originally appointed. There's a history to that there are different histories to that, how that came about. But further, at the end of his section on sadhana bhakti, and the end of his section on Vaidhi Bhakti, sadhana, and Rag Bhakti, sadhana, these two sections, in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami says, and there is another sect that refers to Vaidhi Bhakti, my term, Rupa Goswami's term, and they call it Maryada. And at the end of his Raganuga Bhakti sadhana section, and there's another group, and they call it Pushti. And in both these cases, said they're more or less the same. So you have to consider that the Vallabha doctrine, with all of its differences from ours, that, whoa, it seems so different, it's very solidly a Vaishnava Sampradaya. It's very much refuting the Advaita perspective, as all of Vaishnava Sampradayas do. It's a Ragamarg Sampradaya, like ours also. It has Gopi Bhav in it, a certain kind of Gopi Bhav, different than ours, but also, and Vatsalya Bhav. They are devotees of Krishna in Braj. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu respected them, Rupa Goswami respected. They have differences in language that's used. This is language that's used, philosophical language, to try to explain something, right, that's beyond word, beyond thought. So different persons set about it in different ways. And we like the way Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's sect has spoken about it. We can argue objectively for it being a better explanation and so on and so forth. But I don't think we should do that to the point of then criticizing, not that you're doing that in your question, but criticizing Vallabha or Madhva. Go back to Vallabha for a minute. Another thought comes to my mind that, well, in one sense, we're all here today because of the Vallabha Sampradaya. What do I mean? Anybody know? Huh? Baladeva Vibhushan. No, he was from the Madhva Sampradaya. We are all here today because somebody named Sumati Morarji, who was a disciple of the Vallabha Sampradaya, gave Prabhupada passage on the Jaladuta to come to America. Vallabha Charja Ki Jai. So these Sampradayas have been working to a large extent hand in hand. There are some differences, sectarian differences that come up, mostly in the minds of, and loom large, mostly in the minds of Kanishtas, neophyte devotees, who tend to want to draw these strict boundaries. It's good to have boundaries. Sectarianism has a positive connotation also. It's important to know what your sect says, but it's also important to know that other sects say it different, and we differ from them, but they don't have to necessarily be wrong, but we have our own way of thinking about it and so forth. Yes, there is a samsaran jiva among other types of jivas in the Vallabha Sampradaya. In the Vallabha Sampradaya, there's also pusti marg jivas and rag marg jivas, and it's thought there that these jivas are they exist for the very purpose of being Maryada bhaktas or rag marg bhaktas. It's inherent in them. That's what they're for. That's what they're all about. And then there are the sansara and jivas, and there are different types of those also. I've never gone into it in any detail. Now, I have never heard anywhere that it's emphatically stated or explicitly stated by Vallabha or his followers I say literary contribution is not that comprehensive compared to some of the other sampradayas. Vallabha's has written a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, but it's very, very brief. But I've never seen anywhere in their writings, and of course I'm not a great student of the Vallabha Sampradaya either, but anywhere I've never seen it said or emphasized that it's necessarily that the samsaran jiva has no prospect for liberation. He may not. I kind of think he doesn't. And to your point, so you're asking about that. Now, Madhva Sampradaya, similar idea, right? Different types of jivas. Rajasic jivas, he has tamasic jivas, he has sattvik jivas. The sattvik jivas are capable of attaining liberation. The other two are not. Again, he'll cite the verse I cited from the, whatever it was, 17th chapter of Bhagavad-Gita or 16th, I forget. And he has other supports for it, and he uses his logic that there are different types of jivas. Look and see, and why are they choosing differently? Why would they be different? Must be Bhagavan wants different types. I mean, they're all him. You know, he didn't create them, but still they exist for his different purposes. Why does anything that you as a person exist? Well, I have a hand for this, I have an ear for that, I have a nose for that, and a tongue for that, and he has jivas for this and jivas for that, and that's who he is. The composite is God, right? His whole emphasis, for that matter, is Dvaitavad. So you have Advaita and Dvaita, you know, the opposite. Advaita means non-different. There's only one. There's nothing else. And Dvaita says there's only one, but there are a lot of differences within the one, something like that. So he has, I think, 5 types of differences. 5. I mean, he might have the difference between jiva and Bhagavan, difference between this and that world and Bhagavan, and I don't remember all of them. Again, I'm not a student of Madhva's doctrine entirely, but we do appreciate Madhva's doctrine and see him as a stalwart, great Mahajan, great Vaishnava, and the first to, amongst the Vaishnava Sampradayas, to come out directly, strongly against the Advaitin perspective. First? No, I guess maybe Ramanuja was first. No, I can't remember now. Was Madhva first? I think Madhva was first, then Ramanuja came. No, Ramanuja was first. Yeah, because Madhva also critiques the Ramanuja perspective and emphasizes difference, right? Now, we have great respect for the Madhva Sampradaya for his challenge against the Dvaita, which was considerable, and also for his emphasis on deity worship. And his worshipful deity in Udupi is Krishna, who was previously the deity of Rukmini, that he found in a large chunk of tilak aboard a boat, was bringing it with something else that had got lost at sea. And he went on the beach and held some flags and mystically brought the boat to the shore miraculously in some way. And then they gave him a gift of the tilak, I guess. I don't know, it sounds odd with the gift, but anyway, inside it, as it turned out, it broke open and there was a deity, thought to be the deity of Rukmini. That deity is worshipped from early in the morning till noon every day, is the Abhishek, and there are 9 or 8, I think there's not one temple and 8 temples around it with 8 acharyas, and every 8 years one acharya gets to do the worship. And for 8 years they raise money to spend on the deity. That's how they do it. So it's a very nice sampradaya, and from that sampradaya, as Braj Sundari has reminded us, all of us, Baladev Vijibhushan came to Gaudiya Sampradaya. He was originally a member of the Vallabha Sampradaya. Baladev Vijibhushan was like a new Jiva Goswami. He was so prolific in the time that he wrote, and he wrote Vedanta also. I don't think we can distinguish Jiva Goswami from Baladev by way of saying Jiva Goswami was not a Vedantin, but Baladev was, just because Jiva Goswami didn't write a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. He wrote a commentary on the Bhagavatam, and he wrote a Satsandarbhas, which is sixfold treatise on the Bhagavatam, which is the natural commentary on Vedanta. So it's pretty terse, the Sandarbhas, like a commentary on the sutras would be, and so on and so forth. And for that reason, we consider Jiva Goswami like the Tattvacharya, rather than the Rasacharya, like Rupa Goswami, for example, of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So in a similar way, the writings of Baladev, given that he wrote the Govinda Bhashya commentary on Vedanta Sutra, very philosophical. That's what I want to say. Jiva Goswami, Rupa Goswami, more theological, writing about Krishna. Not that the philosophy is not about Krishna, but there's a subtle difference between philosophy and theology, right? So Baladev Vibhushan, huge. I mean, that's not the only thing he wrote. Many, many things he wrote. He wrote commentaries also on Rupa Goswami's work, Stavamala, and on his work Laghu Bhagavatamrita, and many others. He was very prolific, Baladev Vibhushan. And he brought with him, or in his Prameya Ratnavali, he outlines, I believe it's 9 tenets of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. The jiva is eternal servant of Bhagavan. There is gradation of jivas, like I was saying earlier, and by karma and by worship, how they worship. This is different. So I don't know if I went into that, but there's a gradation of jivas, obviously, in the spiritual world, right? Some are in Vaikuntha, some are in Satyarasa, some are in Durarasa, some in Shantarasa. It's just like there's a gradation here. Of course, there is no gradation there in that everybody feels theirs is the best, and it is for them. So no problem, right? But anyway, gradation of jivas and others, right? Hari is the Supreme Personality of God, whatever. So he outlines them at the beginning and he goes through them. And at the end, Baladev cites those 9 things again. And the verse that he cites there actually, in the second case, was written by one of the great Madhva, great acharyas in the Madhva line, his own verse. And he says, these tenets are the same as I've written at the beginning. These tenets from the Madhva Sampradaya are the same as ours. So there's a certain sameness. We say, oh, I've heard Madhva says this, Madhva says that. He's completely different philosophy than ours. Well, it's not entirely different. There's 9 very central points from that Baladev Vibhushan has singled out and said, these are Gaudiya tenets. So there's the philosophical connection. You may look and see that some people may say there's a superficial, perhaps formal connection, because maybe like somebody like, let's say, Madhavendra Puri, someone could argue, and some have, that he must have been a member of the Shankar Sampradaya, because Puri is one of the 10 sannyas names that were given by Shankar, and Ramanuja doesn't give that sannyas name, and Madhva doesn't. So there it is. So whatever, that's not a very comprehensive argument, but he could have been previously, like many of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's, a good number of the sannyasis, they were initiated, like Mahaprabhu himself, in the sannyas from the Shankar lineage. Of course, Mahaprabhu converted Keshava Bharati first by whispering the mantra in his ear, saying, "Is this the mantra you're going to give me?" And gave him which gave a Vaishnava interpretation of it from his heart. But Paramananda Puri, Ishwar Puri, Brahma-Madhva Bharati, and so forth. I mean, it's good reason to believe that they took initiation from sannyas from the Shankar Sampradaya. But these the sectarian lines were not drawn as firmly at the time as they are maybe now. And these were sannyasis, so they had, they were a little deeper. They were mystics, not religious people, would only identify with externals and therefore emphasize the differences. And so they, like Sridhar Swami, as I'm saying, there's the likelihood that some of them were initiated in the sannyas and the Shankar Sampradaya in Puri, where bhakti is an emphasis, and then the bhakti got the better part of them, and then they came and joined, in substance, a Vaishnava Sampradaya. So, so someone could say Madhavendra Puri was originally initiated into sannyas in the Shankar Sampradaya, and then through the influence of other Vaishnavas, he came to a Vaishnava conception, and there's a formal connection with or he came to the Madhva Sampradaya, let's say, coming from the Shankar sannyas, and from the Madhva Sampradaya. So there's a formal connection with Madhva, but there's no substantial philosophical connection. So that argument is made, and I think that it's one that Mahendra is raising. But as I'm pointing out, look at Prameya Ratnavali of Vallabhidibhushan, and there's a substantial philosophical connection, an agreement, the philosophical points between Madhva and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sampradaya. And, among the points, what does he say? He says, and mukti is the jiva's experience of its own ananda. And the means is ananya bhakti. There's your inherent and bestowed at the same time. And so, just as a highlight a point, there amongst the nine, two of them. That said, okay, yeah, I mean, we have some differences from the Vallabha Sampradaya. We have some differences from the Madhva Sampradaya. You're highlighting one nature of these different kinds of jivas, but it's not as black and white as it might seem. And furthermore, we say, as I've mentioned already, that Vaikuntha is variegated, transcendence is variegated. So there are, in a very broad and basic sense, our own Sampradaya says, well, there's Brahman, there's Paramatma, there's Bhagavan. These are not just different names for the absolute. They actually speak about different features or aspects of the absolute that can be realized by different methods. And so even within the method of bhakti, by which we realize Bhagavan, well, there are different types of different forms of the Lord, right? There's Vaikuntha, there's Goloka, there's Ayodhya, and within Goloka, there's Dwarka, Mathura, and within Braj, there's different rasas, and so on and so forth. So it's a variegated experience, and as such, we would see, we have no reason to think, and it would be offensive to think, that that Madhva was something wrong with him, that he was contaminated, or no, his Sampradaya has its bhaktas and Vaikuntha, and he's there. So does Ramanuja. They may differ here, but there they don't. The differences there don't in attainment don't matter. So they are, and for reasons like these that I'm citing, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was inspired in his main mat there in Mayapur, where you are, Chaitanya Mat, to establish deities of Madhva, Ramanuja, Nimbarka, and Vishnu Swami. So all those deities are there. Bhakti, and of course, Bhakti Vinod Thakur was very, very insistent that that Gaudiya Sampradaya should be understood as the Brahma-Madhva-Gaudiya Sampradaya. that has a connection with Madhva and Brahma. Now, one of the things that some Madhvas may say, who are these Gaudiyas? What do they think? They've got a connection with us. And so, of course, we have the mantra. The mantra that was given to Brahma, that's the Gopal mantra. That's our mantra. It's not the mantra given by the Madhvas. And they don't have an initiation other than sannyas, I don't believe. Anyway, so there are differences and so forth. But we should look at it in a generous way. Certainly not criticize, and I'm not saying you're doing that, but not criticize Vallabha or Madhva. And they have support for their perspectives and ways of talking about the different jivas and so forth. And we don't differ that much, as I'm saying, if you really look closely. So now we said something, what was Madhva and Ramanuja influenced by the caste system, therefore to say there are different kinds of jivas because there are different types of persons and different statuses within karma. I think we've addressed that to some extent, but were they influenced by the caste system? Well, let us say that they were part of the varnashram society that was thriving, and was the entire social system that was ordained by Krishna. And we would assume that it hadn't become what Bhaktivinoda Thakur called an asura varnashram society, which in his estimation was a way of characterizing a varnashram society that insisted that birth alone determined one's status within the social system, and without recognizing the fact that aside from birth in a particular family, someone may have characteristics, qualities, and so forth that differentiate him or her from other members of the family, the parents, and in substance identify him with another caste, right? And this is a statement in the Bhagavatam, 7th canto of the Bhagavatam, where varnashram is explained there. This point is obviously made, and arguably in the Gita also, Chaturvarnamayashishtam guna karma vibhagasa. So there it said the division is made by guna and karma. Now there's different ways to interpret that, but we interpret karma to be the activities that he does, rather than the karma by which he's born entirely, and of course his quality is guna. So. And our interpretation obviously is addresses the practical experience. Are you going to not allow Prahlad to go in a temple when Srimadeva put him on his lap, although he was he's an asura by birth? You might invoke the wrath of Bhagavan Srimadeva for that type of analysis, and so that he thought that to be demonic, if you will, asura varnashram. His Daiva varnashram, in one sense, was really only the real varnashram system. Now that's hardly in place anymore, but at the time of Ramanuja, Madhva, Vallabha, there was no other social system. There was no democracy or anything else, to consider. There were invaders, I suppose. I don't remember the entire history of India. It's had a history of invasions and so forth. But what the British weren't there. So so yeah, they're not. I wouldn't say that their determination. This is your question of their characterization or description of different types of jivas is a negative influence of the caste system. No, and the last part of your question, if I remember correctly, was, like something like what connection do we have with Madhva Sampradaya, because we have so much philosophical differences. I've already addressed that. You have somebody, you should read the Prameya Ratnavali and see the 9 tenets that we agree with Madhva. And also in Tattva Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami, as I said, he's also going to draw on Ramanuja, as he said he was going to draw on Sridhar Swami, and he's also going to draw on Madhva to make his point. Not that we agree with everything they say, we're a different Sampradaya, but we're different, but we're all Vaishnavas. We all have so much that we agree with. Some people say that Mahaprabhu took 2 tenets from each of the 4 Sampradayas. From Madhva Sampradaya, he took argument against Advaita and deity worship. And from Ramanuja Sampradaya, he took maybe Sharanagati and Vaishnav Seva. I forget all 4 of them, all 8 of them. And so you have 2 in one Sampradaya, 2 in another, 2 in another. You have all 8 in Gaudiya Sampradaya. Once I mentioned this to Dr. Kapoor, Adi Keshavadas, disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta, he said, no. He said, Mahaprabhu has all 8 and each one took 2 from Mahaprabhu. I like that. So I hope I remembered and addressed all of the points that you raised in your question. And you're not, being in India, probably not on right now to comment further, but if you are, anyone else does, let's hear that. Any other questions along those lines before we go forward? Rather long answer, but rather long question. No. Ernesto, then next question.
Okay, so the next question is from Chaitanya Charan from Chile. And he wrote it in Spanish, so I'm going to let Madan Mohan interpret it first, and then he can translate it to you in English.
Well, forgive me for forgetting to talk more slowly.
Yes? Yeah, Guru Maharaj, you can hear him, right?
Sí. Can you say it? Can you say your question in Spanish, por favor? Hablo en español, por favor. Sí, por favor.
Bhagavad-Gita 16:12 says that spirituals or something it's up in material endeavors and some spiritual endeavors too. What are your opinions on that?
What is it? There are spiritual and material endeavors?
Yeah. Very much. I translated it in Google Translate. I think what Chaitanya Charan is confused about is that Vishwanath says that also we should give up as devotees some spiritual endeavors such as studying the scriptures. And he's like, how is that? Why would you give up studying the scriptures?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Rupa Goswami has taught us in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that one should, as one of the, regarding the angas of bhakti, this is kind of a negative, but he says therein that one should not read too many books. So the idea is to be one-minded, focused, so on and so forth. Try to understand the ideal, the goal, and there's plenty to do just being focused there. This is what Rupa Goswami is speaking about Now that will apply differently to different devotees. If someone is commissioned to preach, for example, then he or she may have to read more text and be that may be useful. But speaking in general, and I would say that the positive that to say what he's saying positively when he says one should not read many books, is that one should read the books that are pertinent to one's own progress, like Bhagavad-Gita and other Gaudiya texts. But also, I'd have to look and see what exactly Vishwanath Thakur says there in the 12th chapter, verse 16. I don't have it with me. I will make a comment, and that being that among other things like history, for example, more obviously, but perhaps less obvious to some, Bhakti Vinod considered philosophy, history, and other things to be relative. So there's a certain historical perspective, for example, on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when you're looking at the world as his associates did at the time from a Puranic perspective, you're going to call him an avatar. And then you're going to think, what avatar? And because he's obviously overtly spiritual, and then you're going to analyze and you're going to come to the conclusion that he is, well, he's coming in Kali Yuga. Maybe it's the Kali Yuga. But anyway, but then, there's more to him than that, and so on and so forth. And there the texts come out, and he's Swami Bhagavan. I'm not saying it's not a good argument, it is, but it's all an argument within a certain historical perspective, where the Puranas are your main historical kind of texts to look at. Now, they're not considered historical from the modern historical point of view, but they are a history of feelings and so forth about God, God's possibilities of God, and how people thought, in previous times, and so on and so forth. So they have a historical, somewhat nature to them. Not if you compare them to the doctrine, the discipline of history today, academically and so forth. But they're not to be dismissed as just some made-up stories. They're based on true stories. That God comes to the world and he has unlimited faces to appear in, and so on and so forth. So living in that world, then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was seen as the Kali Yuga. Then someone might say, well, what's Kali Yuga? Where's that? Where were the dinosaurs? Or whatever, So from a modern point of view, archaeologically looking at it, historically, they have a whole different way of talking about the world and the history that has no room for Kali Yuga, Satya Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, people, human beings living, millions of years ago, something like that, 400,000 years. In Sridhar Maharaj said, they lived in their bones in meditation, in samadhi, with Satya Yuga. They're all in samadhi. So anyway, we don't have to get worked up about it. Any number of perspectives are about as accurate as as the other from one angle or another. You can say, well, this one seems modern one seems more accurate historically, factually, telling about time and so forth. But there may be some virtue to it in one respect. But what does it not say about time? What time's about? Where time comes from? About pastime, being pastime. What about that? And how to stop time, and what's time for? What's the purpose? And so on. So these are different ways of talking about life, right? And you have to look and see which one is more comprehensive. Which one talks about life in such a way that gets more to the heart of the why of it all, its purpose, and so forth. We take only a modern perspective, which is driven so much by a purposeless life. You know, this fellow Lovejoy, I think that's his name, biologist. He wrote the Gaia thesis. Remember the Gaia thesis, right? So the Gaia thesis is one that says that the earth is an organism. We're all like part of that organism, right? Living and pulsing. So it's an environmental kind of a perspective. But his original doctrine had was, if properly understood, was purposeful. It made not only the earth an organism, but it had purpose. And so, because the predominant meta-narrative in the world is in philosophy and science is the world is purposeless. There's no meaning except the meaning you make up. Things are just bouncing off of one another and there's no meaning to it. That is the dominant philosophical perspective in the world. And in academia, if you deviate from that, you more likely better start your own school or you're not going to get a pension. It's very heavy. This is what was that guy who wrote that famous book in the 70s about paradigm shifts. I forget his name.
Thomas Kuhn.
Yeah, Thomas Kuhn. Thank you. And he documented this. How science, for example, will get into a certain paradigm, and then that'll start to work. And everything will function according to the paradigm, start to be economically fruitful, and everything's working. And so when information comes that's contrary to the dominant paradigm, it tends to be dismissed. And only after a long time will a paradigm shift take place where the old paradigm will be retired and the new paradigm will come to prevail. And in the course of writing about this kind of thing, he pointed out the obvious fact that scientists, let's say, for example, in their white coats are, after all, human. So they are subject to their own biases, predecessors, paychecks, and how to interpret the data, and so forth. So we're in the middle of a paradigm shift right now from materialism, which is the dominant philosophy, as I'm saying, to one in which it's understood and accepted that consciousness is not material. We're in the early stages of such a paradigm shift. So we're on the cutting edge. We're ahead of the curve here. But anyway, I'm getting a little on a tangent here, but history. So from the Puranic perspective, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Yuga avatar, and there's a whole Puranic way of talking about. From a modern perspective, we can still make him completely divine and say he had these qualities. He wasn't an epileptic. He showed this ecstasies, and we can talk. There's a way we could talk about it. I thought to write a book about it at one point. I might do that, and so on. So the point I'm only making relative to the question, forgive me if you will, is that history is relative, and among other things, and Bhakti notes it's philosophy too. So one of the things we might be able to draw from Vishwanath's comment, as it's been cited to me without me looking at it, that one should not, what was it? One shouldn't read books?
Pretty much. I actually found the direct tika. Do you want me to read it?
Please do.
Okay, so the verse says, "Dear to me is that devotee who is not dependent on mundane or social activities, who is pure, expert, detached, free from all agitation, and careful to avoid any activity unfavorable to bhakti." And then it's kind of a short commentary, and then Vishwanath Thakur says, "If spiritual endeavors such as teaching scriptures become unfavorable to their bhakti, they automatically give them up."
So first of all, the larger point I'm making, well, there's some relativity to the philosophy. So there's a hole, a ditch one can fall in, as he or she starts to use his or her intelligence to understand the teaching better. And there's this book, and reading this book, and then that book, and there's that book, and I'm going to get that book, and then you build this huge library of books, and you got more information between your ears than anybody else, and people are respecting you, and you're able to regurgitate it and so forth. And right, Maharaj, you have to deal with that. And then you can start to think that you actually know quite a bit when the amount of that's been placed between your ears, very little has gone to the heart and actually changed it. So that's a problem. Or aside from that, one can start to think, I'm going to without doing it consciously, but practically, I'm going to capture Krishna consciousness with my intelligence, because studying the books is a spiritual application of one's intelligence, right? But the books are repeatedly telling us, if we just look real closely, the real message in there is, therefore chant Hare Krishna, which is a trans-rational exercise. It's not an exercise of a spiritualized intelligence. It's an intelligent thing to do, but the act itself is trans-rational. It's singing, it's chanting, it's so forth. And there's so much philosophy to help us to do something that's really very very simple. And you could do it in a big way too. Prabhupada did it in a big way, and there are people who are much bigger scholars than Prabhupada in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And he said it over here. He should have said it like this. And, yeah, but he did this. That's big, right? So those things have to be looked at. So there's a trap that you can fall into with your intellectual aptitude, that you're going to capture it all in these books, and it can become a distraction from the real work at hand. So, but what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur obviously has said here is that, as we heard in the actual text itself, that if studying books, or teaching the books gets in the way, then we shouldn't do it. So there may be possible. Let's give an example. So you're teaching from the books, right? And you come up with something like, and karma is anadi. And somebody goes, well, wait a minute. That hurts my head. Karma is anadi. What does that mean? And there are some souls that are eternally conditioned. Nityabhada, we call them, even in Gaudiya Vaishnava. Some are eternally liberated. I don't like that. Now, how much of that do you have to know to go back to Godhead? Right? You don't have to know any of it, really. You have to have good association. But if so it's possible that certain things you may hear, and given your conditioning, it may be troublesome to you, and therefore you put it aside. I mean, Prabhupada was once asked by one of his disciples that, he had trouble because he had like a scientific mind, and he was finding things in the Bhagavatam that seemed to contradict with modern science. And Prabhupada said, well, just take it metaphorically then. There's a famous letter like that. You take it metaphorically. The main thing is chant Hare Krishna. So there may be a place for putting down the books because they're getting in the way. And it may be getting in the way just by your thinking, just by reading this book, I'm going to, I'm going to capture all this information. The Manjaris act like this, and the Sakas like this, and I've got all the information, and I'm there. And meanwhile, what you have to do to get there is more than even know the map. Let's say you get the map, of India. This is the map of India. I've got it, and I can tell it by heart. The Himalayas are over here, and then there's this peak over here, and that one's higher than that one. This one's lower. Down here is Kanyakumari, Cape Comorin in the south, and this is the temperature there. And it never gets higher than this, and never gets lower than this. And we go to West Bengal and East, and I know it all. These are the holy places. I've got it all in my head. How much closer does that bring you to India? Well, only as much as it inspires you to do the task that's necessary to go there. So there's a purpose in the study, right? And it may, if it's not fulfilling its purpose, then we can set it aside. Vishnu Chakrabarti Thakur ki jai. All right. Well, we're a little over time, but I gave so much attention to those two. If there are any other questions, I'll extend the discussion.
There's a couple short questions, but I think we could just leave them for the next week.
It's likely that next week, of course, we won't have a class because I think I'm flying out to California, to Ardoria on Sunday. So, but week after that, I expect to be there if I'm not washed away in the rains of Northern California.
If there's small, let's hear it.
Hmm?
If there's small questions, let's hear it.
Agni says, if there's small questions, let's hear them. Small questions, the big
Okay.
answer, but I'll try not to let that happen.
One question is from an anonymous person as how do we serve the guru?
See?
It does seem to bring a laugh. I don't know why, but
That's a smaller question.
oh, they're laughing because that's not a small question. It's a big question. It's only a few words. How do we serve the guru? Sincerely. Rupa Goswami says that Vishrambena Guru Seva. Vishrambena Guru Seva. This is how we should do Guru Seva. Vishramba. With Vishramba, which means confidence. It means the confidence. It means faith. It means conviction. With conviction that by rendering service to my guru, yasya prasada, Bhagavad prasada, yasya prasada nagati kutopi. He says it positively and negatively. By pleasing my guru, Krishna will be pleased. By serving my guru, Krishna will be pleased. If by not serving the guru, then Krishna won't be pleased. So by going against the guru, so this is like arithmetic here. It's not calculus of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but it also means Vishramba means conviction with confidence, with full faith. And I have said before, and I should let me comment on it now, that we should come before the guru, sit and doubt. So what does it mean? What do I mean by that? Well, I need to explain it because you're not all Madhvacarya's who would get it. I've realized that now. So the idea is you should come before the guru and with your doubts and express your doubts with the explicit faith that here I'll have them destroyed or cleared. I have that type of connection with someone who can clear the doubts. How? By citing the scripture, by citing previous precedences and so forth. Now, if you come before the guru, he cites different prefaces, she cites different scriptures and so forth, but you just don't have faith in those, that which he is representing and citing, then what can be done, right? So some measure of faith has to be there in the beginning to tread the path. Faith that I can find the answers here. And sometimes the answer might be, sometimes, you don't need to ask that question. Prabhupada would sometimes answer like that. Now, that can be a problem. Like if somebody says, what happens after they eat mangoes in Goloka Vrindavan? Are there toilets or how does it work? What's the system? Then he might say, you don't need to ask that question. Go there and find out. Right? Let's go there and find out. So there may be a place for that, but that shouldn't be abused either, because the guru has to have some knowledge, right? Quite a bit of knowledge, heavy with knowledge, to be able to cite precedences. And that's the other thing. Cite the scripture is one thing, but cite precedences as to how that scripture has been applied in one circumstance, and another circumstance, how it may have been applied differently and so forth. So this is the broad sense, how we should serve the guru, but otherwise the guru gives us instructions to chant, for example, 16 rounds, follow these practices and so forth. So we should, if that's the only instruction we've given, then that's the service that we can render, and we should pay close attention to that. You give us mantra, then we should pay attention to that mantra. Now, not everybody in the modern world has the opportunity to personally serve the guru. Some have. They come to Madhavan, for example, they see me, they have a chance to render service, or they live with me, then they have that opportunity. That's a good opportunity, but not everybody has that. Their situation doesn't allow it. And so asking from that position in a more practical way, rather than in the broader way in which I'm answering it, which is important nonetheless, how can we serve the guru? I'll be frank with you. My experience has been to that question. It's probably, in most cases, it's not worth answering, because many disciples have asked me, how can I serve? And I tell them, and they don't do it. They think, oh, it means I have to give up this or take time to do this, sacrifice that. And so I say, I already told you, chant Hare Krishna, try that. Now, I have things that I'm doing. That's another thing that I want to do them. I feel they're useful for Gaudiya Vaishnavism and so forth. They need support. So one minimal way that you can serve, if you're living outside of the monastery itself and so forth, is to fund it, and that is a kind of a minimal service. You're not doing anything, but you're doing something to make the money, and so the effort that you spent to make the money, some of that is indirectly going to Guru Seva by sending it to, like I have a book that's coming out here one of these days. I lecture about it, then I ask Billy Jasaki, let me write a few things here, these thoughts in this chapter. But also the layout, it's been a little slowed down because, well, you need water to lay out a book. And the two that are laying out the book they're underwater now, but because of the floods, but still there's not enough water in the ground to relax. And they've been busy there with the rain catchment system. But I've written the books before, another one, and they need funding. So you can send funds to help print books, to help sustain ashrams, which like this one, for example, which we asked the devotees to come and visit, spend time with me and so forth. And so that's a practical way. That's a short answer, not too short, but I hope it helps. Next, Arjun wants another one.
Okay. So there's one question from our interpreter, Madam Mohan. I'll ask it, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with this pastime of Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj. But anyway, so the question is, I would like to know the pastime when Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj asked Srila Bhakti Siddhanta what to do, whether he should sleep less or chant 64 rounds. Apparently, he didn't have time to do both. So Madam Mohan was confused about the answer that Srila Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta gave. So he wasn't sure what he recommended, but if Madam Mohan could comment on that, what was exactly Bhaktisiddhanta's response?
If you're doing service, you could chant less. Mm-hmm. Well, what was his answer exactly? Exactamente? What was the answer? You don't know the answer. The confusion is that you don't know. The confusion is that you don't know what he answered. I see. Neither do I. But Prabhupada was asked a similar question. When my godbrother Tamal Krishna Maharaj was serving him in the last part of his manifest Leela, and where he was very, very busy because it involved tending to Prabhupada personally. He wasn't the only one doing it, an assistant too, but he was very busy with that. There was correspondence that Prabhupada was getting, so he was dealing with devotees from other, around the world and so forth. Anyway, he was very, very busy. And so he was having a hard time chanting his rounds, 16 rounds. So he asked Prabhupada about what should I do? And Prabhupada said, sleep less. So similar situation. That's what Prabhupada said. You should sleep less. Now, it's different. He said he was only sleeping 4 hours, and Pramod Puri was spending all this time writing and doing. He was one of the editors, chief editors in the works and so forth. So it very well could have said, edit less, chant more. Or if your Bhakti Siddhanta likely would have said, if you're doing other service, like the writing, which I've asked, and preaching service in particular, I would say, if you're doing preaching service, then you can chant less. Because at least Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj told us that Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's overall position on the number of rounds to chant was Mala Upavasana. Don't let the Mala fast. Don't let the Mala fast. And so if there was this was in the mission, right? Amongst, which would have been sannyasis and brahmacharis living in the monk, then they were all active with service. But they should, even in the context of that, they shouldn't let the Mala fast. Otherwise, the principle was to chant 64 rounds. So there was some built-in, kind of be sincere, don't abuse it, use your intelligence, and don't oversleep, but don't do service and neglect your chanting. But there may be a place for chanting less, doing more service. Now, in the mission of Bhakti Pragyan Keshava Maharaj, disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they had a system, I believe, if I recall correctly, that the brahmacharis in the mission should chant 16 rounds at least every day. But if there was ever a time when they had less to do, then that would all be compensated. That time would be used for chanting. And there was a lot of devotees who would chant 64 rounds. And for the householders in the mission, then they had to chant 32 rounds. Because being householders, the extra time that they had after chanting was not going to be used directly for the mission service, but for other things, and that should be minimized. So that was his system. You would think, oh, the brahmacharis, they would chant 32 and the householders would chant 16, but he reversed it. But this is all to emphasize a particular point. This is the main way of chanting. So that should be, we should develop a taste for chanting. That should, our practice and so forth should revolve around that. So that's that for today. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Nice to be here with all. Muchísimas gracias. Usted también. Okay. Gaur Premanande. I think now you're going to ask some questions and Madam will follow up.
Okay, so let me just preface this real quick. Madan Mohan is going to take over the Tattvavik classes, and they're going to be resumed soon. So he's going to give us a little synopsis of what's to come.
Hare Krishna, everybody. Good to see you. So yeah, so many devotees have expressed that they're missing the weekly classes we were having. They're really nice. So we're going to start this Tattva Vivek series back up. I think next week Guru Maharaj is going to continue to give classes. So we'll restart on either the 19th or the 26th, depending on the availability of devotees to give class. So we'll confirm that by the end of next week. So it's Monday tomorrow, isn't it? So yeah, the end of next week. So keep an eye out for announcements on Facebook and so on. And we'll keep the format as it was when we left off. So it will be 11:30 a.m. Eastern time on a Thursday, once a week. And we might increase that in the future if the interest is there and so on. So we'll see how it goes. But we'll start like that at first so we can keep it steady. And many of the familiar faces that you've all seen and we're all inspired to hear from, we'll be sharing. Some devotees will continue their series where they left off, and there'll be lots of new classes taking place too. And at some point in the not too distant future, hopefully, we're hoping to start more interactive study as well. So for those who want to go deeper into the books, for example, together as a group with discussion, so we can ask questions and, just share our different realizations together in these things. So watch the space for those. And yeah, finally, if anyone has any ideas or feedback on Tattva Vivek and how it's run and these kind of things, feel free to get in touch. We might not be able to implement everything, but what we can, we will. And, what's useful and will be inspiring for everyone to continue with their sadhana and seva. So, yeah, I think that's everything I want to share today. Thank you, Guru Nishta Prabhu.
Thank you. Wonderful. It sounds great.
Sorry, please.
Yeah, sounds very good. We're all eager to get going, I think. And I guess next week, like Guru Maharaj said, there won't be any Sunday call, so I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
And I guess we'll just give a quick darshan of the devotees here, right?
Oh, yeah. What do we have?
Oh, sorry, half of them are left, apparently. The bright faces from the beach.
Okay, I'll see you all